Hello everyone, welcome back to Major Hi-Fi. I'm Luke, and today we're going to be talking about BGVP's NS9 Hybrid IEM. BGVP has been expanding their line of pretty moderately priced IEMs aimed at hi-fi listeners, and I've been spending quite a bit of time listening to the NS9, so let's get into it. These run for $169, and I find that IEMs in this price range, especially the ones that are claiming to be hi-fi, are kind of hit or miss. So when I got my hands on this one, I was quite curious to see how it would perform. So in the box, we get a hard shell carrying case, pretty standard look to it. Then we have the IEMs themselves, along with an abundance of different ear tips. These come in gray, which is pretty much silver, a kind of, I think, metallic blue, and then today we have them in gold. If we open up this case, inside we have the cable, which is a high purity crystal copper silver plated cable. And this has an expandable MMXC design, which is supposed to make sure it avoids distortion and any transmission loss. Along with the cable, we also get this itty bitty little box, and inside of here, we have a tiny bag, which has a couple different options for these tuning nozzles. We're going to get into those later. And then here are the NS9s themselves. You can see a pretty standard body, but they do have this kind of unique design on the back. I think it's kind of retro, honestly. I don't know what word to use for it. I've been using the word space age, I think, a bit too much, but that's kind of what this is giving me. Yeah, they've got a kind of unique design. They feel pretty stylish. I like the look. And they do keep a pretty luxurious profile with this kind of golden back. They don't look cheaply made or anything, and they feel really sturdy. In terms of design, these have an E50DT balanced armature driver for the high end, and then we get a Nozzles RAF 3287 balanced armature driver for the high mid-range, and two FDK 60718 drivers, which were actually custom designed for BGVP. In total, they contain 7 balanced armature drivers and 2 dynamic drivers, which is why they are called a hybrid IEM. These also have a frequency driver circuit to help balance out their sound. They have an impedance of 25 ohms and a frequency response of 10 Hz to 40 kHz. In terms of comfort, they have a really good shape for your ears. They just lock in really perfectly, and they're really smooth, and yeah, I just like the way that these felt. They just fit in really easily, no like fiddling to get them in right, and they feel really good in your ears. Alright, so there's your tech specs, your looks, your feel, all that jazz. Let's talk about how they sound. So overall, these definitely have a pretty specific sound, and I think that they are good at what they do, but you want to make sure that you are looking for the sound that these offer. So I'm going to go into what I heard from them. In terms of Soundstage, the Soundstage was good. It felt slightly above average other IEMs in this price range. I wouldn't call the Soundstage anything abnormally wide, but it definitely met the standard and at times felt to exceed it a bit. And in terms of instrument separation, I would say there was a bit more blend on this. It didn't feel muddied or overlapping, but definitely very coherent and built. You'll find vocals get a ton of room to breathe, and the edges of the stereo field are well respected and conveyed. And yeah, I mean, honestly, the theme throughout these IEMs were accuracy, so I felt like their soundstage was pretty versatile. There was times where I felt like it was super wide and times where it felt more average. It wasn't a soundstage where every single song was absurdly wide or where every single song was not nearly wide enough. It kind of took things song by song, and I found that it had a good range in terms of width. Alright, so the high end on these. The high end is very interesting to me because my initial reaction to these was that they were kind of dark, and then when I was kind of listening to them more, I was like, why did I ever think these were dark? They're clearly very bright. But I think I figured out why that is. So basically, these are pretty bright, but they are bright in a very specific area. It's not a very wide boost on the high end. The high end on these feels much more prominent in the 16 kilohertz range, and a lot less prominent in the 8 kilohertz range. So you get that kind of like, you know, light, thin sheen right on the top, a thin layer, but you don't get that kind of, you know, wide boost, overarching, just big slope on the high end. I will say, even though the high end, more around the 8K range, is not quite as prominent. It's still very detailed. It just has a bit of a different timbre, but it has a bunch of definition and articulation, as does the high end further up on the spectrum. I would say overall they pull detail and definition in a very smooth way, and like I said before, in the 16K range, it is a little bit more of that kind of shine. Once again, they're very just realistic with the high end. So I found if I played something with a lot of high end, they were able to translate it very well. So I listened to the album Trinity by the artist Earth Eater. Highly recommend checking her out. One word, Earth Eater. And this album is like drenched in high end. It is like the most bright album ever, and that's why I like it a lot. It's very ethereal. So when I was kind of leaning towards the idea that maybe these were a little dark, I was like, well, this is the test, because if this sounds dark on these, then these are a super dark headphone. But no, it sounded bright as ever, but very smooth, and like I said, very warm up in that range. It was a really good, comfortable presentation of the song, and kept it from getting any hissing or sibilant frequencies up there. However, I will say with certain songs that aren't inherently bright, if I played it on these, they would have a bit more of, I don't want to say a dark translation, they never really felt dark, but not overtly bright. So there would be songs I listened to where I'd think, yeah, I guess this song is darker than I realized. It just hasn't really been shown to me in a while. So I think that they're just honest in their high end. I don't think they're like brutally honest about any mistakes or, you know, imperfections or impurities in the song like a reference headphone might try to be. They're just sort of, they're not going to boost something huge across the spectrum, but they do have the dynamics and range to translate, you know, a wide array of different timbres and tonalities and styles. And even when they're not super bright, they still never lose that accuracy, that articulation, which I appreciated a lot. So you never feel like you're getting a roll off on the high. It's just a different presentation. So yeah, like I said, the high end definitely is very nuanced and interesting. They do walk the line in terms of brightness. I would say they're kind of in the middle on my shine radar, I guess. All right, so the mid-range. The mid-range on these seems to take precedent over the high end, I think, for the most part. So definitely not sharp, still very warm. These are an overall very, very warm headphone. I need to find more synonyms for that because that is too general of a word, isn't it? But yes, we get a bit more activity in the mid-range. I played the album Murmurations by Simian Mobile Disco. I am obsessed with this album right now. It'll be included in an article I'm writing about really good albums to listen to on your favorite headphones. That'll be up on Major Hi-Fi soon. This album is basically techno, but mixed with a lot of acoustic drums, and then over all of that is a full live choir that is recorded singing over these like dance beats. It's so wild. There's a live version of it. You gotta check it out. So I've been throwing this album at a bunch of different headphones and seeing who can do it justice because I'm just so obsessed with like getting the best possible, you know, translation of this album. And I played it on these and they did a really good job of giving a really full bodied, you know, translation of the choir sound and letting the drums sort of hit in that really satisfying area of the mid-range. They definitely added a bit of warmth to the kind of airy, you know, reverbed out sound of the choir and definitely brought them right up front. The low mid, which was mostly getting hit with the drums, was really nice in terms of just giving us like a ton of punch. And also just these timpani drums that are in some of the songs and were kind of rolling from ear to ear with these really velvety rumbles. I found it fairly satisfying and gratifying in this area. It's definitely not the mid-range for everyone, I think, because it does have this, once again, kind of like the low highs. It doesn't have that kind of sharp in-your-face definition that some headphones have, and I don't think sharp in-your-face is a bad thing. It's definitely very, very, very warm and very smooth, like I said, so you have to be looking for that, but a lot of people are. I wouldn't call them thin or subdued in the mid-range, more so just very colored and just a very rich timbre, you know? So avoiding anything metallic, but when you avoid anything metallic, it definitely does make for a presence that's a little bit less forward and a bit more rounded. Okay, so the low end on these, I am excited to talk about this. So similar to the rest of the tuning on these, the low end is pretty versatile and dynamic, so it doesn't have a super hard set signature to it, but it is pretty heavy and intense. Now, an intense low end is a dangerous thing to be playing with because it is pretty, you know, easy to let it kind of run off the leash and just go way too far and swallow up all the rest of the frequencies and just dominate the sound of a headphone or IEM. I definitely don't feel like these do that. They have a very clean, very tight, once again, really punchy low end, but my God, can it go really insane if you wanted to. Like, there is no kick drum, no bass line, there is nothing too massive for the low end on these. It'll take on whatever challenge you throw at it. And these do a pretty good job of keeping things balanced. You know, they let the low end have its space to give this massive performance without kind of discounting or deprioritizing the rest of the frequency spectrum. So it never felt like it was just canceling everything out, but it definitely did feel like an important part of these IEM's sound. I listened to He by J. Paul, H-E, similar to the song I mentioned in our last video, very 80s sort of Depeche Mode, synth-filled track. I guess I'm kind of on a kick with those type of songs right now. But this song has like these really, really tight drums that are like super duper in your face, and then it's got this synth that's sort of laying spread out in the mix and is incredibly sub-heavy. Like, it is so huge, and this is another one of those songs that's really hard to translate well because it's offering some pretty big extremities in terms of composition. In the best way possible, my head felt like it had been literally turned into a subwoofer. I loved it. I wanted it to stay that way forever. I mean, it really gave it all it had, and it was so successful. It was a really incredible translation of this song. Just the sheer width and power and, you know, just intensity of the bass and the way it was so smooth and well-tuned and tightened up, but also just really expansive. It was just very what I was looking for, basically. But by no means is this the way that the bass sounds on every track. Like, for example, I played, I think it was Suspicion by LP, which is a song that is a lot more resonant and bright, and the low end is really not the focus of its composition or mix. So I wanted to make sure it wasn't just going to take what low end was there and just blow it out of proportion and give us a kind of unbalanced translation. But it did a really good job of taking a more subtle approach and letting the bass just breathe. It didn't sound like a bass-heavy headphone in that moment. And that's what you want, is dynamics and versatility, you know? Is the headphone capable but not overly eager? Yeah, so the low end on these might be my favorite feature, if you couldn't already tell. Really satisfying, really well done. Definitely for anyone that likes bass, these will be good. But they're not like exclusively for that crowd of people because it's just a very well executed bass response. So I think anybody looking for a really solid sounding, just full-bodied headphone, this does the trick. So I wanted to do some comparisons to other IEMs in this price range. I was just curious to see how this would hold up. So I compared it to Final Audio's A4000, and the NS9 was a fair amount darker in the highs and high mids. It was definitely, like I said before, a lot warmer and less snappy in this area. However, the NS9 had substantially more low end and low mid. Overall, the A4000 comparatively just has less warmth. The A4000 is not a not warm headphone, but this is definitely, I think, on the extreme side of warmth. So by comparison, it just felt like it was, yeah, not at the same timbre as this one was, really, in many ways. It was a pretty stark contrast between the two. About equal on the Soundstage front, but yeah, these IEMs are definitely for two very different types of listeners, or both for a listener who has versatile taste, but I know many of you are hard set in your ways, and I don't blame you. So yeah, I say that the A4000 was much more of a slope up towards the mid-range and high-end, whereas this is kind of the inverse with a little extra boost at the very edge of the high-end. Next, I compared it to the Meze RAI, and this is also, I think, about the same price. Sort of similar to the A4000, a fair amount more mid and a fair amount less bass than the NS9. The RAI and the A4000 both have just way more high-end in the 4K and 8K range than this does, which was not a surprise to me. But that being said, I think that the NS9 does outdo them in the 16K range. And the NS9 just has overall a less forward mid-range than either of these IEMs does. Just warmer and more colored and kind of letting the articulation and the definition speak for itself and not really pushing the mid-range much, but instead pushing the low end and the high end a bit more. So yeah, maybe a little V-esque, but it's not pushing the mid-range downwards. It's just a bit more neutral maybe in this section. All right, so the tuning nozzles. I was pretty curious about these and very skeptical because I always see accessories like this that I'm like, we'll see if that actually does anything. And so I definitely went into these with a bit of a skeptical mindset. I couldn't really find much about which one was supposed to do what. Maybe I need to do some more digging. I'll let you guys know if I find out. But I was just, gonna listen to them and tell you what I heard anyways. So the black nozzle is what I use for this entire review, so you know what that one sounds like, hopefully by now. And then I tried out the red one, which I found to be a fair amount brighter and kind of upping that 16K range and starting to edge more into the 8K range a little bit. Not an insane difference, but honestly, yeah, a noticeable difference. I was pretty surprised. I think the red ones I might have actually liked more than the black ones, but maybe just because it was a new sound after listening to the black ones for an extended period of time. And then the silver ones kind of seem to have a similar effect on the high end, maybe even a little bit more so, and they also seem to extend the mid-range and maybe the low end just a slight amount. Yeah, these aren't a drastic effect. They're not meant to be, to my knowledge, but they are really nice to have to help tailor the sound a bit more if you have any little problems. I think this offers you the versatility to probably fine-tune this at least a little bit to the point you want it to make sure that it's the best it can be for you. So overall, this IEM, the NS9, I think it definitely does have a very particular sound to it, but it is a particular sound that is being done in a very successful, well thought out way. For $169, I think this is a pretty good bargain. I would say it competes above its price range, and definitely is worth checking out if this is the price range you're looking in. It definitely, matches with its competitors and maybe goes above and beyond some of them. If you like, a fair amount of bass, a very warm high end, but a little bit of sparkle on the top and, kind of neutral colored mid-range, then this will definitely give you that. And it still has tons of articulation and a really ample soundstage. So yeah, it checks a lot of boxes, and some of those boxes it checks and then goes above and beyond, which is what you want to see from a good headphone. Not every IEM is the absolute best at every single thing, as I'm sure you know, but this one is really solid and it hits a good couple home runs. And you also get the accessories of the tuning nozzles, which I think are a great bonus. So yeah, worth checking out. I give them my approval. I would really love to hear anybody else's thoughts who's heard them, and if you have any questions about how these sound compared to other IEMs that I didn't mention, or just any other questions in general, please leave them in the comments. I'd love to talk more, or post on the Major Hi-Fi forum and we can talk on there too. I also did a written article on these per usual, so I'll link that below. If you'd like to compare these to a super wide range of IEMs, I'll also link to Major Hi-Fi's IEM ranking tool. Alright, I'll be back soon with more reviews, and until next time, happy listening.